I'm gonna try and make this a short kind of intro video into this topic I stumbled upon of the planet Vulcan. I'm gonna try and make it just like an intro video because it seems like a good jumping off point for a few different things that I would want to talk about. So this planet Vulcan was apparently a real planet, or thought to be a real planet, or a luminary, or whatever you want to call it, a wandering star, all the way up until, I guess from what I can gather, they say it wasn't disproved, or it was believed to be there, all the way up until Albert Einstein's theory of relativity became accepted. Somehow, I never heard of it, we never heard of it, all the way up until, I guess, the 1930s or 40s. So, I'm going to start with, I found like 3 different articles about it, and obviously there's Wikipedia stuff. But, it's discovered by this guy, James Watson, who dies shortly after discovering it. He's on a trip with Thomas Edison, all the biggest astronomers of the day. A bunch of other people supposedly observe it, and it's accepted by everyone. This guy dies mysteriously like a year later, I believe. Yeah, he was with Thomas Edison, like these same people that just keep showing up all the time. But yeah, I'm going to start with this National Geographic article, and it's just whether this story is true or not. It's almost certainly, not true, just by the way we see news today. I imagine it's always been the same way, but it's still part of the story. It's part of the reality, and since they can't really create anything, it has to be based originally on something true or something organic. And just like there's always been mythology and oral tradition and stories, in the mythology there's always been lessons, like truth contained in it, and there still is for some reason. Wherever these stories come from, they're not creative to completely make these things up, so they have to be based on some point on an element of truth. Yeah, so looking at it that way, this story is just a great, study in how reality works. Just like, what is going on here? Why do we see what we see? How is reality generated? Einstein destroyed a planet, discovered relativity, and deciphered the universe. Wow. Tom Levinson reveals how this revolution could not have happened without disproving an obscure astronomical calculation. According to Newton, Mercury's wobble was caused by the gravitational pull of some other planet. Enter Vulcan, the so-called other planet, first observed in 1859, confirmed by the greatest astronomer of the day, Urbain Le Verrier, and hailed by the New York Times as one of the great discoveries of the century. Trouble was, it didn't exist. So there's a wobble in Mercury's orbit that they can observe. So according to Newton's laws of physics, there must be a planet inside of Mercury, and they called this Vulcan. But I, to be honest, I don't really understand all the details of it, but Einstein's theory of relativity is dependent somehow on disproving that this planet's there, because I guess he's trying to show that the wobble is really a bending of space or a bending of light or something like that. But anyway, the story is, in order for relativity to be accepted, the existence of Vulcan had to be disproven, destroyed, or vice versa, which is also very funny because, Vulcan, like in Star Trek, represents logic and reason. So it's like destroying Vulcan and introducing relativity. If these things are supposed to represent aspects of the mind or the psyche or aspects of man, so it's like the logic, reasoning function was destroyed or eliminated. with the new paradigm of relativity being brought in, rather than, I guess, a more objective, organic interpretation of reality. It says, disproving Vulcan's existence was central to the theory of relativity, which Einstein pictured here at the Mount Wilson Observatory unveiled 100 years ago. So disproving Vulcan's existence was central to the theory of relativity. So apparently that it was known to exist up until this time. So Vulcan is remarkable because the idea of this little body inside the orbit of Mercury makes perfect sense. If you believe Isaac Newton's theory of gravity, which everyone does at that time, well, who knows, you know. The discovery of a slight wobble in the middle of Mercury's orbit that can't be explained by the tug of Venus or Earth has only one interpretation. There has to be an undiscovered planet or flock of asteroids that can't be seen because it's too close to the sun. Not only does that make absolute sense within the mathematical framework of Newton's theory, it's how scientists managed to figure out that Neptune had to be there based on the wobbles of the orbit of Uranus just a few years before. The self-deception comes in that over the next 20 years, people believed they saw specks of light that corresponded to what they thought Vulcan should look like during an eclipse. Round objects crossing the face of the sun, which were interpreted as transits of Vulcan. So, like, they take it basically, whatever model of reality they have, they find the evidence. It fits perfectly. In Newtonian gravitational theory, the math says there's a planet inside of Mercury, and right where it should be, they observe it. The most famous astronomers of the day, they all observe it, they prove it's there. They can see it transiting right where and when it should be during an eclipse. But, if you have the relativity paradigm worldview on, then everything you observe is perfectly supported by the math as well. Like, and you can't see Vulcan anymore. At least that's the story, you know? So the story goes that the Great Eclipse of 1878 basically was where this was observed. Followed a track that started in Siberia, crossed over Canada, and then went all the way down the United States through Wyoming. This was such a major event that the U.S. government funded observation stations up and down the track of totality. Other astronomers who weren't part of the official parties flocked to places regarded as the most likely to give a good view. So Thomas Edison's there. On the day of the eclipse, Edison tries his instrument, doesn't actually work. Again, there's this like there's always like the main current of the narrative and the counter current. It all comes from the screen, from the same place. So they got like the main current of Edison's a genius. He invented everything. And then the counter current's always like, Edison's a quack, he's a fraud, he's a con man, like, so whatever, he's testing some quackery, it doesn't work. But James Watson, director of the Ann Arbor Observatory, saw a little bright star where there was no star in his chart and said, that's Vulcan. News of this discovery was reported all around the world within days. And then you have Urbain Joseph Leverrier, the most famous astronomer in the world and director of the Paris Observatory. Only a few years earlier, Leverrier had discovered Neptune at the tip of his pen. So he had done a similar analysis of Mercury, so there was utterly convincing logic that Vulcan had to be real. So the same guy that discovers Neptune also mathematically says, yeah, Vulcan has to be there, and he has a partner who observes it. Leverrier's at a New Year's Eve party. Lasker claims to have observed it through a telescope. Leverrier goes to his house and is convinced. As he trains his telescope on the sun, he sees a round object on the face of the sun. He times it as it moves steadily across the sun. So long story short, you get it. They see it. All the famous astronomers see it. This guy James Watson is credited as the main discoverer and then dies shortly after. And just listen to what they're saying here. whoever wrote this, or whether they know what they're saying or not, just think about this. Vulcan teaches us how hard it is to understand what nature is telling us. How hard it is to understand when nature says no. There's this famous phrase that a single brute fact can undermine the most beautiful theory. But that's not how it worked for Vulcan. And it's still not how it works. Like, yeah, even though you see it with your own eyes, you observe it, you know it's true. Well, that can't undermine it. That's not how it works. What you see is not reality. Until you have a framework that allows you to see that there's an alternative to what you thought before, you can't easily assimilate new facts. So you could just rephrase this whole thing, or you could look at this whole situation the other way, that whatever you believe, you observe that. You just see whatever you expect to see, pretty much. Whatever the prevalent paradigm or prevalent belief is what you observe. People kept discovering Vulcan because the way they saw the world required Vulcan to be there. It took Albert Einstein to provide the framework in which Vulcan became not only, it says something non-existent, not only non-existent, but unnecessary. It's like the story of the conquistador ships coming over the horizon and none of the Indians could see it, or just the medicine man, because they didn't understand or believe in it, so they couldn't see it. This is another article from Almanac. On July 29th, 1878, over 100 astronomers observed an eclipse along the shadow path from Montana to Texas. During this eclipse, American astronomer James Watson claimed to have seen the much-debated planet Vulcan, which was said to exist between Mercury and the Sun. I don't know how much debated it is, because if the same guy who discovered Neptune, based on these calculations, and it's accepted by everyone, he also says that this planet Vulcan is there. I would imagine it's probably equally accepted. Which was said to exist between Mercury and the Sun. This body, whose existence had never been scientifically established, had been predicted by the French astronomer Leverrier. Today, we know there is no planet Vulcan. Like, no more logic, reasoning, faculty, like Spock in Star Trek. Like, that aspect of the human is gone. Today, we know there is no planet Vulcan, at least none that could have been seen through Watson's 4-inch telescope. But he did see it, and so did all these other astronomers. I'm just going to throw this in a side note. I thought this was interesting, too. This is the total solar eclipse of August 7th, 1869, also across the United States. The eclipse's path was almost one continuous observatory, lined from beginning to end with astronomical expeditions. Clear skies prevailed on eclipse day. One of the most intriguing discoveries made was that the spectrum of the solar corona had a mysterious green line in it. This green line was in the same spectral position that was produced by iron in the laboratory. But how could iron be present in the corona? So that was the most intriguing discovery of the 1869 eclipse, was the solar corona has a mysterious green line in it. What does that mean? I have no idea. Reminds me of the Photoshop pictures of the moon with the green line around it, though. Here's another thing about Edison in this other article. A 31-year-old inventor named Thomas A. Edison had brought a pocket-sized device called a Taseometer that he claimed could detect a change in temperature of only 0.000001 degree. He announced that he was going to measure the heat of the solar corona, but astronomers were not impressed. The Taseometer was proven ineffective. I mean, what is going on at this time? Like, is this just a total hoax, or is quackery, or like, why would he even think this would work? There had to be something going on. A pocket-sized device called a Taseometer. Who knows? I almost feel like they just gotta throw these characters into the story, though. Like, you know, with Edison and Tesla, it's like this underdog story. This guy, James Watson. And like that's the countercurrent story, and this evil like Thomas Edison sneaking around in the background. And then there's one last one, University of Michigan. Watson was the first professional astronomer to report seeing such a planet and record observations. Live long and prosper is the traditional salutation spoken by citizens of the fictional planet Vulcan of today's Star Trek lore. But while Watson prospered, his reputation in astronomy circles soared, and his abilities with numbers served him well in business. He did not live long. Of course not. Nearly 1 year after he'd reluctantly left UM and its Detroit Observatory for a new, better observatory at the University of Wisconsin, Watson died unexpectedly. He had hoped to better observe Vulcan and record more extensive calculations. Instead, his death in 1880, 2 years after his triumphant Vulcan discovery, stunned friends and colleagues in Ann Arbor. So he dies suddenly, unexpectedly, 2 years later, before he can make more observations. It almost seems like that had to be eliminated for the paradigm that whoever wanted to come in. Like, had to get rid of Vulcan, had to get rid of the people holding the idea and who understand what's going on, like, in order to eliminate that paradigm and move on to a new paradigm. And this little blurb blow up from the article, they mention Edison again prominently. On a viewing trip to Wyoming in 1878 during a solar eclipse, Thomas Edison traveled with him. James Watson was sure he had observed the rumored intramercurial planet Vulcan. What's Edison? Is Edison like this dude's handler? They send Edison in to just like sneak in and fuck people over, like Tesla and this guy. Like Edison's like some kind of weird spook or something. They send in to just fuck these people. So that's this guy, James Watson. He reminds me of someone. If he's a real dude, R.I.P. James Watson. And I also think you've never heard of this guy. We've never heard of the planet Vulcan. And mostly that's because if you try and Google James Watson, you get James Watson, the discoverer of the double helix DNA. Much more famous, of Watson and Crick. And I call that phenomenon like... it's like a search overlay. You know, like occulting search terms. Like they'll overlay names. Like if they want to erase something from history, they'll create a new character with the same name to overlay it, so you can no longer find it in the searches. Or they'll call something else. Like Bureau of Land Management the same acronym will be something else. You know what I mean? And that'll happen all the time with names and acronyms of organizations and people. It's like hiding. It's like a way of overlay. I'm always talking these overlays. That's how it's done. Like the magic, the magic. So I just want to real briefly touch on this goober, James Watson, the other James Watson, the overlay, the discoverer of DNA, wins the Nobel Prize. 1962, he wins the Nobel Prize. He's a eugenicist, obviously. Resigned as chancellor after making comments claiming there's a genetic link between intelligence and race. And then this other thing, this is very strange. In 2014, Watson sold his Nobel Prize medal to raise money. Part of the funds raised by the sale went to support scientific research. Part? How much of a part? 1%? This dude pawned his Nobel Prize. Jeez Louise. The medal sold at auction at Christie's in December 2014 for US $4.1 million. Watson intended to contribute the proceeds to conservation work in Long Island and to funding research at Trinity College. It doesn't say he did. I want to point that out. It says he intended to. It doesn't actually say he did contribute any of it. He was the first living Nobel recipient to auction a medal. Wow, what an honor. You're the first dude to pawn your Nobel Prize. The medal was later returned to Watson by the purchaser, Alisher Uzmanov. So it's just one of these payoff schemes like they're always doing. And you're never gonna believe this, but check out his awards. What do we got first on the list? Albert Lasker Award. Remember from my War Games videos, this is Lawrence Lasker's dad, Albert Lasker. He's like Edward Bernays type, if you look into his story. So the Lasker Award is called like the American Nobels, because everyone who wins the Lasker Award wins the Nobel the same year. So how weird is that? Like, this James Watson dude overlaid the Vulcan James Watson dude. The dude supporting his research is Albert Lasker. Like, what? The Albert Lasker Award for Basic Medical Research. One of the prizes awarded by the Lasker Foundation for a fundamental discovery that opens up a new area of biomedical science. It's like this, whatever. The award frequently precedes a Nobel Prize in Medicine. Almost 50% of the winners have gone on to win one. What? 50% of the Lasker Awards? So the Lasker Awards decide who gets the Nobel Prize? There's a picture of them with President Lyndon Johnson. This is Albert Lasker giving the award to Lyndon Johnson. You can't make this stuff up. Classic. This is just sprinkled in here. Another racist eugenics thing. At a conference in 2000, Watson suggested a link between skin color and sex drive, hypothesizing that dark-skinned people have stronger libidos. This stuff wasn't going over too well anymore. In 2000, it was time to shoo him off stage. Watson has repeatedly asserted that differences in average measured IQ between blacks and whites are due to genetics. Yeesh. Yeesh. Yeah, they had to get rid of this guy. They put him in a nursing home in 2000, looks like. And just super quick refresher about Albert Lasker, the Edward Bernays clone or type. You should really... I went way into it in the War Games video, which you should go back and watch, because I thought it was really crazy what turned up in that research. Like, those turned out to be good videos, I thought. But American businessman, and this is why I say it's like Bernays, because he had a thing where his big first stunt was getting women to smoke. Lord and Thomas, ad agency. Yeah, Lasker devised a copywriting technique that appealed directly to the psychology of the consumer. Well, women seldom smoked cigarettes. He told them that if they smoked Lucky Strikes, they could stay slender. Lasker's use of radio, particularly with his campaigns for Palmolive soap, blah, 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 not only revolutionized the advertising industry, but also significantly changed popular culture. This was this weird part where his partner is John E. Kennedy, a former Canadian mounted policeman. This whole thing is bizarre. Like, I feel like it's just like, I don't know. It's like these nodes that just like, it's the pattern. You know what I mean? Like, am I nuts? But like, he's giving the award to Lyndon Johnson right after, you know what, and like, his partner's John E. Kennedy instead of John F. Kennedy. Like, what is going on here? Yeah, this was bizarre. He's appointed the chairman of the United States Shipping Board, confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Inherited a large mess, which over 2,300 ships under shipping board control, losing money every day. He disposed of useless, blah, blah, blah. He saves everything. And look, why do they mention this specifically? His accomplishments, including the refitting of the SS Leviathan. Leviathan. They always got to throw this shit in. Neptune or Leviathan or whatever. As well as he originated ship-to-shore telephone service. Like, what? This is Lawrence Lasker's dad, who made War Games. Lasker had no previous experience in the shipping business before his appointment. So, like, who is this guy? Why you mysteriously suddenly no experience? You're the shipping board commander. You gotta save 23 ships and refit the Leviathan. Like, what is this? His other big thing, they keep going on about orange juice, which for whatever reason, they always want to do orange juice. Which I've looked at, yeah, whatever. It's 3-3 in the numerals, and I thought it was funny. I did the one about light and like wavelengths. They measure colors of light in micronanometers, and orange is 666 is like dead center of orange. Micronanometers. So you have this old idea of the stars or the planets or whatever, the sky representing parts of personality or parts of man, parts of the psyche, or at least people would project their inside story and their psyche, project it onto the sky, this common interface, the matrix, that we're all looking at the same thing, so we can all project our collective subconscious onto there. And like I said, if you think back to a more organic environment, or where you're living in nature without screens everywhere, or even without electric light, at nighttime, you're always going to either be looking at the sky, and your only light is going to be by a fire. So we have these parallels in the new age, like the skins of a video game changing, the new paradigm. Instead of the screen being the night sky, and you're always looking at the night sky or a fire in front of a fire, now we have electric light and the telly. And it's interesting because, like in Kabbalah, they call the intersection of the nodes, the ecliptic, the telly. Like the night sky, they're seeing their collective subconscious in the telly, because that's where everyone's attention is. That's the common interface, like the matrix. But now it's the screen. That's what we all look at together. We're not looking at the actual sky as much. Or people are looking at like Stellarium, the sky on the computer. So the screens now are where we project our collective unconscious. And it's also like this becoming more and more artificial and locked down by observing more and more and more. Like distance from skeptical observer. Like the more you're observing everything, the less things can change. Whereas like fire, at night, the night sky, it's a lot of room for interpretation. You could see anything, like looking at clouds. It's totally free and open, and like the light of a fire, there's no electric light. You're always just in the firelight, and it's like a very wavy, flickering light, not like a steady fluorescent electric light bulb. And like everything looks different in the firelight, like there's a lot more play for what you can observe and experience, and your subjective reality and your subconscious can manifest. You can see that in physical reality a lot more in the light of a firelight and under the stars, rather than watching a screen and being in fluorescent light bulbs. And everyone was observing the sky. So some people, just by their nature, are going to be more observant and notice, like, hey, I always see this star here. I know that Jupiter's going to come up here, even without trying. When you spend your whole life looking at the night sky, especially if you're interested in it, you're going to know it well. So people just naturally would understand astronomy, at least from a visual perspective. They would know the sky script going by, and they could project, their collective subconscious onto the sky, because they're all familiar with it. Which just observing it and understanding it and the symbolism, I think is totally different than trying to determine what you should do in the future by astrology. Like trying to divine some personal gain from it. That's what I think is harmful and detrimental. Is trying to, I think, observing nature is good. That's what we're supposed to do. That's like the closest thing we can get to the truth, is observing nature, but you don't do it for, you do it for the purpose of just appreciating it, not to gain some material advantage by it. It's like one of my recent favorite little snippets from scripture has been Proverbs 25:2. Proverbs 25:2, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings to search out a matter. I love that. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings to search out a matter. One, we're supposed to search it out. It's supposed to be a joy. You know, it's life. It's the excitement of life. And that's our honor, to search out a matter. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to try to understand. So something else that I think ties into this, the sky, the things in the sky, the luminaries representing the collective unconscious or aspects of the psyche or something like that, is the moon. These craters on the moon they call Maria. It's interesting because it's like Mary, the moon. But these craters are actually, if you look down to the bottom here, they're states of mind. All the names refer to sea features, sea attributes, or states of mind. That's what the craters on the moon are named for. Yeah, the only one, there's a couple that are different. It says when Mare Muscoviens was discovered by the Luna 3 and the name was proposed by the Soviet Union, it was only accepted by the International Astronomical Union with the justification that Moscow is a state of mind. So these are the craters. We have like Sea of Serenity, Sea of Tranquility, Mare Crisium. Sounds like Christ, but apparently it's Sea of Crises. Interesting. Crisium, Crises. Mare Cognitum, sea that has become known. So that's the agreed upon naming of these, is as states of mind. Okay, and I started with Vulcan, like Spock in Star Trek, logic, reason, disappearing. This little clip from an Alan Oken book I was looking at, about the discovery of the planets that can only be seen with a telescope. Astrology grows with the consciousness of man. 3 planets have been discovered since the late 18th century. Uranus in 1781, Neptune in 1846, and Pluto as recently as 1930. Each of these 3 corresponds to the newly developing faculties of man's total being. Uranus is associated with industrial and scientific inventions. Okay, Uranus, 1781 discovered, industrial and scientific inventions. Neptune, 1846. Neptune is instrumental in the creation of all cinematographic work, cinematography, and the psychic aspects of the mind, and the use of modern psychological theories and techniques. Okay, this is like the birth of cinematography and the birth of psychoanalysis, as Neptune is discovered, 1846. And then Pluto in 1930. Pluto is related to the processes of atomic energy and the collective unconscious of humanity. So you have Uranus discovered in 1781, industrial and scientific inventions. So it parallels the story of the Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1820. So that's Uranus. 1781, it's going to be right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. 1760 to 1820, it's right in the middle. The mechanization also led to an unprecedented rise in the rate of population growth. You know, who knows? Chemical manufacturing, etc. And then we have Neptune discovered in 1846 to parallel and is supposed to represent cinematography and psychological theories and techniques. 1846, Neptune, okay? So then we have the experimental film, the earliest surviving motion picture, Roundhay Garden, October 14th, 10/14, 1888. Roundhay, Leeds, England. 1888 is very interesting. Like when I did that video about This Is Rome, Gate 3, Twin Pines, Gate 3. 1888, Queen Victoria reestablishes the order, like the Knights Templar, Knights Hospitalier. And I showed their Garden of the Keyhole in Rome. In 1888, Queen Victoria restored the order by royal charter in England. And her son afterwards, King Edward VII, became the first Grand Prior since Tudor times. The Priory in Rome. The banners of all the different language groups, the famous langues into which the order was divided, hang in the nave. So that's 1888. First motion picture. Queen Victoria reestablishes the order, and it's this same time as like Back to the Future. Doc goes back to 1885. First known use of the word solipsism is 1885. The Trickster. That's where he gets sent back to, the beginning of this era of cinematography and psychoanalysis. So it's Neptune, discovered in 1846. First motion picture, 1888. And then the following year, an experimental film camera was developed by W.K.L. Dickinson, working under the direction of Thomas Alva Edison, was the first to design a successful apparatus, the kinetograph, patented in 1891. First one on photographic emulsion, celluloid strip. As opposed to this first one in 1888 was paper film. But here's Thomas Edison again. Like I said, he's always in the background. These characters, he's like the Benjamin Franklin of this time period, like the late 1800s. And around the same time, you have Sigmund Freud publishing his first books. In Vienna in the 1890s, the introduction of psychoanalysis. So we have like simultaneous psychoanalysis and cinematography, with Neptune discovered in 1846. And it's like the collective subconscious gets transferred from the telly in the sky to the telly on the screen in the New Age. And it goes from like fire light to electric light, And it's like goes from magic to psychiatry, psychoanalysis, and they're all mixed together. Like where back then you have astrology and divination with the night sky, now you have cinematography. That's like and psychoanalysis all blended together. That's like magic. And you have like regular filmmaking, like the magic, Disney, the magic of filmmaking, the regular filmmaking, which is like stage magic. And you always have like the overt and the occult, or the exoteric and the esoteric. So you have like stage magic with a C, which is like regular film. You go to college to make film, the magic of movie making. And then you have black magic, which is like, subliminals, NPL, MK stuff, flicker rates, all these wacky sciences like psychotronics. That's black magic. You have like the stage, and most people think they're just watching TV, and then embedded it, and it's all psychological techniques, obviously, are embedded in all this stuff. So it's like stage magic and ceremonial magic. And I want to do a whole other thing with Freud, because this is the basis of our whole modern society, pretty much. They're all eugenicists and not good to kids and women, and they're just warped people. So I'm going to do another video looking more into this. But his first book, Freud's, on aphasia. It's interesting. His whole thing starts all around language, the word, like in people with the inability to speak. That's not a physical defect, but it's like a mental defect. And again, he obtained his grant to study with Jean-Martin Charcot, a famed neurologist, in 1885. That's when he gets his grant to do a study. 1885, just like Back to the Future and everything's happening at this. This is when we're shifting, it looks like, into a whole new set, a whole new like paradigm. And then you have Pluto, discovered 1930, representing atomic energy in the collective unconscious. Like, that's the most recent thing we're coming into, World War II era. 1932, Ernest Rutherford discovered that when lithium atoms were split by protons from a proton accelerator, immense amounts of energy were released. 1932, he splits the atom. And then 1942, the first successful nuclear reactor, Chicago Pile 1. It led to the building of a larger single-purpose production reactor, such as the X-10 pile. Interesting. That 10. Say 10. X. 10. For the production of weapons-grade plutonium. The 1945 is the Trinity test. What do these names mean? Who knows? But you make all these subconscious associations. So I think that's it for this one. I'm going to keep it pretty short. And I think the next one, related to this, then I'll really go deeper into the birth of cinematography and the birth of psychoanalysis and Freud. And I'm going to go into that aspect in detail. All the Neptune stuff. Neptune. The discovery of Neptune, 1846, paralleling the introduction of cinematography and psychoanalysis. All right, take her easy.